Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are doing a Christmas episode. It's one that we had planned to do for quite some time. And we're excited to bring to you, it's about the Wandering Jew. But before we get into that, I would just like to shoot out our familiar little phrasing. If you have a paranormal story, video, or picture of your own, we do ask that you submit that to us at our official site, which is www.effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And it will most likely get on the website and possibly into a podcast. And with that having been said, back to the main topic of the hour is the Wandering Jew. Now, many of you, actually, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a popular story that went around up to the 1900s. And if you actually Google it, and you Google the Wandering Jew, you will actually come across, the first thing you'll see is a Wikipedia entry and a little description in the Google listing that says, it's a fictional story. So you might ask, why are we covering a fictional story? Well, it's not entirely all fictional. It actually does have some basis where people have allegedly seen the Wandering Jew all throughout history, okay, like centuries and centuries and centuries of these witnesses. So the question isn't so clear and concise as to say it's fictional. Now, there was many plays and novels and short stories and even movies made about the Wandering Jew. But, is this a case of, real stories affecting media, or is it media affecting, is it the chicken or the egg? What came first? So we're just going to tell you what we found, and it will be up to you guys to decide what you think. But I think it's pretty fitting because the story actually revolves around Jesus' time and Jesus himself, and it's Christmas, so it seems pretty relevant. So what is the Wandering Jew? Well, we'll start by saying that he's not necessarily a fictional character, but he goes by different names. The first thing that the constant that goes among every story that you'll find, because, there's different variations. The one constant that you'll find is that the Wandering Jew was a man who made some slight against Jesus as he was struggling to carry his cross to his crucifixion. Now, in almost all versions of the story, Jesus stops to catch his breath while dragging his cross, and this Jewish man steps out from the crowd, and he either slaps him on the back or he pushes him. He otherwise, taunts him, mocks him, laughs at his pain, and, tells him to hurry up or get out of his way. Really, it's kind of like not just insulting, but rubs salt in the wound, so to speak. So it's after that this happens that Jesus allegedly curses this man with immortality. And at least as far as the story goes, I mean, this man is cursed to walk. He's not immortal in so far as that he's on earth forever, but he is cursed to walk the earth until Jesus' second coming.
Yeah, I believe that it goes something like he steps out from the crowd and says, oh, why do you tarry on your journey to the hill or something like that? And Jesus turns to him and says, well, I won't be long for this world, but you shall tarry here for until my second coming or something to that regard.
Yes, and while I can understand that, and obviously anybody who's Christian that's listening to this is going to have an immediate dislike to the idea of, that our Savior, Jesus, would actually put a curse on somebody. And I get that. That's a controversial, kind of a thing. But there is actually some stories in the Bible that make similar references, not necessarily this story, but make similar references where Jesus had said the same thing. Now I can't remember I think it was Cain and Abel had a part there somewhere in the Bible. But anyway, there is certain references in the Bible, and of course there's other references in early history that reference the same kind of curse being laid on somebody.
Yeah.
Now, the wandering Jew is said to age seemingly normally, until his body hits the age of 100 years old. And it's at this point that he actually sheds his skin like a snake, and he emerges from that shedded skin, and he looks as if he's 30 again. And this process will repeat indefinitely until Jesus' second coming. And another little interesting detail about the wandering Jew, and I didn't find this everywhere, but as an interesting detail I did find in one spot. Apparently he doesn't cast a shadow. And for people who are on the lookout, who are trying to spot the wandering Jew, I mean, that's one of the telltale signs that they say to look out for. So, anyway, back again to the history of this. This is not just a North American or passed down from Christianity or anything like that. This is actually a legend that has been widely passed on in England, North America, Germany, Denmark, France, Russia. I mean, basically everywhere. And while it's mostly been passed on in novels and short stories and poems and music and plays and stuff like that, the most important thing is that it's actually been passed on by alleged witnesses. And there's documentation that goes back throughout the centuries that have been preserved that does reference the fact that the wandering Jew is actually a real thing. So, as is the case with any old story, be it myth, legend, or fact, the character often has different names, trades, and backgrounds. Well, the one that we're going to focus on, the main one, is he's known as the Count of Saint Germain. And the Count's origins were never really known. Nobody saw him age, that was one of the staples. Nobody actually saw him age. Nobody saw him eat. And while some people believe that he did disappear, people have allegedly seen him long after that, documented it, and people still claim to see him today, believe it or not. So, let's talk a little bit about the...
And for any of you out there wondering if there, if there's a specific passage in the Bible, I do believe there's a passage 16:28 Matthew, or Matthew 16:28, I guess is the right way to. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So there's a precedent there, at least, for one, and maybe who may be, quote unquote, cursed to wander the earth until the second coming.
Yes. So, I mean, is it possible that this story could have, been born out of some of those lines in the Bible? Well, who's to say? But again, the interesting part is that there are alleged witnesses to, like, not one witness in one period of time, but all throughout history. Now, back to Saint Germain, or the Count Saint Germain. Apparently, the Count was recorded within the European scene for 245 years, which, as we now know, we know it's not possible for a normal human being to do that. So this is written, in historical records, which put him there, in the European scene between the years of 1651 and 1896, right? So I mean that's unless somebody fucked up real good when they were doing the records, I mean that's a considerable amount of time for a human being. But it is interesting. One thing I noted myself was that if you read the Bible back a long, long time ago with the giants and stuff like that, apparently humans used to be able to live for like 500 years. That was normal until we all sinned and God finally he reduced how old we could live. But
Yeah, the very first, sons and daughters of Adam, going down through the lineage with Methuselah and Enoch and all those. Like you said, they had these huge lifespans.
yeah, so I mean it wouldn't be the first time that the Bible had referenced a human living to abnormal ages. Now, as we get back to the saint of the Count of Saint Germain, and there are different names for him, but from what I could tell, there's two main names that come up, but for all intents and purposes, they seem to be the same person. Okay, so the two men that I'm speaking of course, you know of the Count of Saint Germain, but apparently the original name was Cartaphilus, or, geez, I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Cartaphilus. I know you know what I'm speaking of, Ryan. Is that how you would pronounce it?
It's close.
Okay, it's close enough. Cartaphilus. So fuck this. Anyway, that's what we're going to call him. Now, he was allegedly a Jewish doorkeeper. And he was one of, this was the guy who allegedly assaulted Jesus. I mean, him and Count Saint Germain are the same person, keeping that in mind. So, the first mysterious run-in that I could find involving this Cartaphilus character was actually in the 13th century. There was a large group of travelers that had been coming back from England, and they all reported seeing this strange man who had claimed to have been here since the day of Jesus. And, obviously this was strange to hear, for anybody. But, I mean, he had said this to this large group of people, and they came back, and they told a story, and everybody kind of found it weird. And then this was later reinforced when an archbishop claimed to have dined with a mysterious man who confessed to him that he was Cartaphilus and that he was the one who had mocked Jesus and was cursed to walk the earth for eternity. Now, either the group of people were gullible, as was the archbishop, or perhaps there was something convincing about this character because it was enough that they went back and told everybody about this strange encounter they had with this strange man. Now, there's been many encounters with this Cartaphilus character that, happened allegedly through these centuries, much like you hear of this Count of Saint Germain. And oddly, each recorded meeting seemed to happen, at least with the Cartaphilus character, seemed to happen closer and closer, geographically towards Western Europe. Like you could almost plot it on a map that every time there was a meeting, in time, it was a little closer to the western of Europe. So one would assume that he was traveling there. And eventually, this man, this very strange man who was dressed all in black, showed up in Paris. And this was in the year 1740. So he shows up in Paris, and he's loaded down with all of this really expensive jewelry on display. He had diamond rings on each finger. He had a diamond encrusted shoe buckle. He was very much looked to be a man of wealth and fashion. And in Paris, keeping in mind that there was fashion and upperclassness was like their thing. So he really appealed to the upper class nobility of Paris, and he was quickly welcomed into their fashionable group. Now he told them that his name was the Count of Germain. He didn't say his name was Cartaphilus, but nevertheless, he shares a lot of the similar things, and we'll get to that in a minute. So the interesting thing that he displayed to these people was that he displayed his talents, of which there were many, in front of their best writers, their best philosophers, their best scientists, the aristocrats. By all accounts, he was just very, very unnaturally talented. He was an amazing piano player. He was an amazing singer, violinist. He could fluently speak Italian, Russian, Spanish, Greek, Sanskrit, English, Chinese, Portuguese, and of course French. So, on top of that, he was allegedly an amazing alchemist. He was an artist. He was a very, very knowledgeable historian. He had learned the secret science of enlarging gemstones. He was very well versed in the occult. He seemed to be, the master of everything. People have talents. You can even have multiple talents, but that is a large repertoire of things to have, and especially to be like a master of. So anyway, one night in front of all these important people, they're all having this really big conversation, all the important people. And eventually the topic turns to religion. And the people were pretty perplexed, as they get onto this topic. And the Count of Saint Germain, he starts to speak of Jesus, but he speaks of him as if he knew him, not like, a historic story that he's retelling or something like that. He spoke as if he knew him, telling stories of his miracles, like turning water into wine, not from the point of view of I read this, but from the point of view that he was there and saw it. And after he reminisced for a while, he became really quiet and tearful. And he said, and I quote, "I had always known Christ would meet a bad end." And this really kind of waved across the people in the room, as you can imagine. Especially, there was something about him that people could tell there was a genuineness, there was always something strange about him with all of his talents and his knowledge, but just the way that everything kind of came together. There was something strange about the Count of Saint Germain. Now, he was also able to speak of other notable people in history with unbelievable accuracy. And even the details that were only known by the most notable historians, he knew it so well that he could speak it fluently off the top of his head.
They have such a complete knowledge of such esoteric history. Yeah. One of the most interesting aspects, I think, comes from the idea of Saint Germain as becoming an ascended master. There's this whole idea that through the learning of alchemy and, various other forms of occult, this individual, and I guess it again becomes even more intriguing to think that, if this guy is indeed the wandering Jew, and if he is, there's no reason to think that he's not around still today. So I guess I don't have to talk about him in the past tense, but the idea that he had some connection with Christ, and then, 1,000 years later, is responsible for kindling this whole new wave or New Age kind of movement in all across Europe, including his connections with the Rosicrucians and several other mystery societies. Just take the alchemy by itself. I mean, in this day and age, we don't put much stock in alchemy, but at the time, the idea of being able to turn base metals into precious metals was extremely attractive. And that the fact that this guy wandered around literally encrusted head to toe in jewels and diamonds. And in fact, it was said that he could take, several small diamonds and fuse them together into one big one. And like you said, he was all throughout his wanderings, I guess. He was invited in by the aristocracy of the time, and in fact, it is largely attributed to him that he actually foresaw the French revolutions. So there's again there's this link with him to prophecy, and I reading some of the more esoteric stuff, because when you get into Saint Germain, it's one of those strange things that goes in every direction. You find them in Knights Templar and connected to the Illuminati and to the Illuminated Knights and to the Rosicrucians and all these different orders and all these different movements. And there are lodges. I believe it was a Messianic lodge that has in their official records, mention of Saint Germain coming to their lodge and passing along certain wisdoms. So you have this connection, or all these connections, I guess, with all these different secret societies and occult esoteric orders.
Like who else would get so much time to get tied into everything that's so secretive? And
exactly, especially in that day and age, for someone to travel all across Europe, and according to those who spent time around him, he never seemed to age a day, and on top of it, you have this whole. What's the word I'm looking for? They're not just the mystery surrounding the knowledge that he has that he doesn't share, but just the mystery of how does this guy speak 12 languages fluently? Master musician and artist, and have such deep knowledge of such specific historical events that like you said, only the top historians would really know anything about. And, he seems to have almost personal knowledge of this kind of stuff.
And, he shows up in Paris as a stranger, and he's so wealthy, like unbelievably rich. Nobody knows where you'd think that people would have some idea who he was, but he was so secretive. Like, nobody knew where he got his money. Nobody knew where he got his skills. Nobody knew where he came from, his family. He just shows up, and he's like unbelievably wealthy, unbelievably skilled. The guy was just crazy mysterious. And, just to kind of go back and reinforce the idea that he doesn't age, so this is a little story that kind of reinforces that idea. And it revolves around this old countess of Von Georgi, who met him. She had met him long before, and she runs into him again, many years later, and she immediately recognized him. She knew she met him before, and it apparently had been like 50 years that he had met her in like Venice. And she was just amazed, and she looked at him and she said to him, like, "You look the same age now as you did back then, like 50 years ago." And she was just really confused, and she had first asked him, "Are you, is your father the Count of Saint Germain?" Not believing it's possible that this could be the same man that she had met in Venice. And the Count, he allegedly shook his head, and he told her that he was, in fact, the Count of Saint Germain. And, she was just flabbergasted by this. And, she said, "How is it possible that, you could look like this?" And he allegedly just said, because she didn't believe it. And he said, "You were so beautiful," when he saw her as a young woman, and he, referenced how he had played her like her favorite musical piece on the violin. And I mean, this kind of confirmed for her that it was the same person. And she was like, "Well, you must be like 100 years old." And the Count says, that's just not possible. And then she said, something to him like, "You're just an unbelievably amazing man." She said, like, "You must be like a devil," and this really insulted him, by the way. This really hit a sore point for him. And he said, and I quote, "For pity's sake, no such names." And apparently with that, he had turned his back, shocked the Countess, and just kind of stormed out of the room. So, I think there was some kind of underlying guilt with him. I mean, maybe he thought to some degree, like you would, I mean, if it was true that Jesus had cursed him to walk the earth forever, and he was the only one to be cursed like this, I mean, would you not be kind of concerned that maybe there's not a good place waiting for you? Maybe you are a devil.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the people to do that to who apparently is our Lord and Savior. So I mean, he's had like hundreds, if not thousands, of years to kind of mull this over. So to be called or referenced as a devil, I'm sure, was a particularly sore point for him. Now there's many other stories of people that he had met, after this, but I do find it interesting that nobody really saw him eat either. I mean, he's been to these spectacular banquets, held at the courts and held at these rich people's places and stuff like that. And by all accounts, he would abstain from food, he would abstain from wine. The only thing that people really saw him do was sip from mineral water.
And reportedly, the only thing he was ever seen eating was like this bland oatmeal mixture.
Yeah, like I believe, like when people asked him, he used to say that, or when people were asked about it, they would say he was a vegetarian. But I mean, even so, I mean, I don't think everything everybody ate was meat. I'm sure they had porridge and stews with, without meat in it. But I mean, nobody really saw him eat anything. I mean, that was the thing about him, right? And I mean, there was another time. Where was it? In I think it was 1745. This was during the, I think it was the Jacobite rebellion in Britain, and the Count actually gets arrested. Gets arrested at this coffee house, and what was it? Paternoster Row, and he was allegedly charged with spying. So anyway, the first prime minister there, he ended up mentioning this whole ordeal with one of his lifelong correspondents, in which he wrote, and I quote again, "The other day, they seized an odd man who goes by the name of the Count of Saint Germain. He has been here for these past 2 years, and he will not tell who he is, where he, or sorry, I'm going to unquote it, but this is the general message. He won't tell who he is, where he comes from, but he does, claim that he does not go by his right name. And I think that's an interesting point because, again, we mentioned that Cartaphilius was the original name, and Count Germain is, the second name that we hear, but we think it's the same person. But anyway, he claimed that he didn't go by his original name. And he also said that, this count, or whoever he is, he sings and plays the violin wonderfully, and he's mad and not very sensible. So I guess, if you were dwindling around for that line, maybe you would go mad. But I do think it's interesting, again, that, here we actually have a piece of history where he claims that he's not going by his original name, right?
Yeah. One of the interesting connections, I guess, and for obvious reasons, would be his connection to Francis II, Rakosi, I guess, the Prince of Transylvania.
Yeah.
Which, I guess at some point he claimed that that he was, the son of Francis II. But in a couple, I'm not sure where I came across it, but he apparently he had left and wherever he was and changed his name and had been taken in by the Prince of Transylvania of all places, and that's where he kind of perfected a lot of his alchemy and did a lot of experiments and mysticism and stuff like that. And I guess from there, it's believed that a lot of his occult teachings kind of spread out and from that castle. So it's interesting when you go back and you look at the tale of the Wandering Jew about him not casting a shadow, and then the possible connections with Saint Germain and his connections with the Prince of Transylvania and the idea of vampires and reflections and shadows. It all becomes a very interesting, murky situation. There's so much going on there. I think the biggest difficulty I've had in following and doing research on Saint Germain is, trying to come up with a clear, a set of chronologically ordered events, and it just seems impossible, because there's so many things that he's attributed to, and I guess if you got somebody who's immortal and has been around for 2,000 years or more,
he's almost like one of the fathers of everything.
Exactly. At some level, he's been involved at the grassroots of so many different occult precepts and ideas. It's almost impossible to get a firm grasp on who or what he is, or exactly what he was involved with.
Well, here's another starter thing that I thought, or I'm saying this now, but I would think would be more of the 19th century, specifically with the military, when we talk about hypnotism, right? I mean, the 19th century is really where I think a lot of the study of the mind and psychology and stuff like that have come from, like our big advances. But, that story I just told where the Count was arrested, apparently, do you know how he got out of there? Apparently, the word is, and this got around, right, that he was able to persuade his detainers that he was innocent. And apparently, this is believed that is very likely to be true because there was a man by Anton Mesmer, and this man is credited with the discovery of hypnotism. And he had actually said that years before, the count, like he knew the count had possessed a vast understanding of the workings of the human mind. And this guy had actually taught him directly, for years, the art of hypnosis. So, I mean, again, like right at the forefront of, hypnotism, and to be able to use that to persuade, his guards to let him go. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about, though. I mean, if you could live forever, have you ever thought about if you were put in jail and you were given like 3 life sentences? Never expected
you could actually serve them all.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a terrifying thought. So it would really pay dividends to know how to talk your way out of that fright. But I mean, he was noticed in other places too. I mean, apparently in Venice in 1969, he opened a mass production factory, and he developed some kind of synthetic silk. And during this period, he also did sculptures in the tradition of like classical Greek sculpturing. And then after that, he was into politics. And
talking about the politics, one of the most interesting political, I guess, involvements I came across was that apparently in some esoteric circles, Saint Germain is attributed with having a hand in helping or inspiring the founding fathers of the United States draft a Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean,
and as well as the design for the Great Seal of the United States.
Well, I mean, you want to hear something pretty amazing about the man? Is that in 1784, he apparently was killed. I mean, that's what had come out. It was that he, the count was dead. This was apparently, the news came from, I think it was Germany. They said he was buried at the local church in Eckernford. They had a big, a big turnout kind of thing. I mean, they even had a cultist at his funeral service. They had the Count Cagliostro, or they had Anton Mesmer, and they had the philosopher Louis Saint Martin. They watched the coffin get lowered into the grave. In 1896, there was a woman by the name of Annie Besant who said that she had met the Count. And around the same year, there was another notable Russian of the same career path named Madame Blavatsky, or however you pronounce it, said that the Count had been in contact with her, and he actually proclaimed to her that, now get this, he wasn't just immortal himself, but he belonged to a race of immortals. And they apparently lived into a subterranean country called Shambhala, and this was north of the Himalayas. There was, in 1897, there was a French singer, Emma Calve, and she had claimed that, she had visited, or he had visited her, and he apparently had been what she called a great chiromancer, and, had told her many truths. Now, I think chiromancy, by the way, is a form of divination. So again, we're like after 100 years later, and people are still meeting this guy. At the same time, in 1877, he was noted for attending a meeting at a Grand Lodge of Freemasons.
And I believe that, his or the record, the Freemasons record, that's kind of a, their official record states that, he visited them, and again, it sets another, in stone kind of point where he pops up again in history. So, I mean, there is so much that, Saint Germain has been attributed to Saint Germain. I believe there's like a series of books referred to as the Green Books, I believe. and there's like 20 volumes of them. For anybody who's interested in Saint Germain, and I mean, by books, I mean things that he directly dictated or had a hand in writing. Um, and there's so much material out there for people to dig through, and I guess it's really up to the listener to decide what is true and what is not true. But the fact remains that whether he's immortal or not in the flesh and blood sense of the word, he's definitely left an immortal and indelible mark on history and occultism and spiritualism in general, and is typically referred to as one of the great ascendant masters, which anybody who's into spiritualism knows that that's one of the titles that is used for Jesus. He was one of the great ascendant masters. So it's up to the listener, but there certainly is a massive amount of information supposedly dictated directly by him that can be pulled up. What was it? The Green Books, I believe, is the.
There is one book that I had seen referenced, and before I tell you what that is, there is a question. I mean, that I would have, and I'm sure many of you would think of, if you were immortal yourself, and that would be, we're on Earth. I think even now, one of the things that we strive to do is to get off this planet. I mean, we even have this mission that we're planning to go to Mars. Like they've carefully selected these people for this mission so that we could go and actually create a livable culture on Mars. Well, if you were immortal, you would essentially have the time to figure stuff like that out, right? Well, that is not Mars, but I mean the idea of getting off the planet, that's one of the things that I have found that he kind of references in one of these books. So this is apparently the only surviving manuscript that is written by the Count. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's on the source I found, that's what it says. And the name of this manuscript, and it's French, I know I'm not going to pronounce it properly, but it's something like La Tres Sainte Trina Sophie, or something like that. Anyway, it's apparently in the library at Troyes, France. And, many people have tried to translate it, because I guess it's a long lost, type of writing or whatever. But they did manage to translate a section of it. And what it is, and I'll say, quote, the quote from the book is, "We move through space at a speed that can only be compared with nothing but itself. Within a fraction of a second, the planes below us were out of sight and the Earth had become a faint nebula." Unquote. So that to me suggests, if it were true, if he had actually written that, and it's not fiction, that perhaps he did find he found a way to leave Earth, to actually, travel at a speed greater than light. Who knows what became of him or where he is now, or, if you were, I guess, immortal, I would imagine that he'd probably get bored on Earth pretty quickly, so I could see the need.
Well, yeah, and what does a 2,000-year-old genius who's seemingly mastered everything he's ever laid his hands on do next?
Exactly, so I mean, maybe he's out there conquering the cosmos. Maybe he's been in contact with aliens. Maybe he, helped create aliens. Maybe aliens are, strange DNA experiments. There's a lot of questions that one would have just by entertaining the thought that, one of our own, from Earth, a human, had actually lived for that length of time and had traveled. And I mean, by all accounts, I mean, if you look back at some of these stories, he referenced that he was a group of immortals. He was one of an immortal race. So, I mean, is it possible that there was a race of these super intelligent and talented, super immortals that just, the potential that a group like that would have? Was this the first group of superheroes? Was it actually, instead of coming in contact by, getting their powers from radiation or, weird DNA experiments and stuff like that, is it possible that they were cursed for something that they had done? There's a lot of interesting questions that comes about when you think of that. So that is pretty much all I could find on Saint Germain. I'm curious to see what you people have to say about it. I mean, I realize again that it's a controversial subject to, heavy religious people, people who are very religious in Christianity and stuff like that, just by the nature that, Jesus would curse somebody. Although, for the record, I'd fucking curse him too if I was walking to my death and this asshole popped out and smacked me and taunted me, I'd curse him. I don't see any wrong in that, but I guess, where Jesus is supposed to be perfect and infallible, I guess I could see how that would be hard for really strong religious people to accept that. So what do you guys think? Have you heard of the Wandering Jew? Do you have any stories or something relevant to this case? I'd be interested to hear it. And Ryan, if you have anything to add?
All I want to say is thanks everybody for listening tonight. The story of the Wandering Jew and in addition, how that leads into the tale of Saint Germain is a twisted and fragmented one at best. And I know we've been kind of all over the place tonight, but we've done our best to spin an interesting tale that combines all of the the choicest bits, I guess, that we could find about these two figures that seem to be the same person. I just appreciate everyone for listening.
And on another note, if any of you have your own effed up story, picture, video, what have you, you can submit that to us at our official site. That's www.effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And not only will it get on the website, but our regulars are aware already that we're doing these new 20 effed up minute segments. And they're perfect for these little submissions that, they won't fill an hour, but they will fill 10 to 20 minutes. And we're going to be putting those out pretty regularly. So it's a good chance that your submission will get into one of those podcasts. So if that's something that you'd be interested in doing, whether that's just to have your story told, definitely submit that to us. And for everybody else listening, we will have those. We do have some planned already to come out soon. So you won't have to wait too long before we have another one. And with that said, we hope you all have an effed up Christmas and an effed up New Year. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
This is Ryan Sharp saying good night.